All right, in this video, I'm going to talk about what ayahuasca taught me about addiction. So these videos I'm going to come out with, this will be a 5-part video series, and it'll be about insights that I had learned from ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is an ancient plant medicine, thousands of years old. There have been relics found with ayahuasca dating back to, I think, like 5,000 years old. But there's so much mystery around this plant, and it's all natural. That's the thing. But there's a lot of mystery, a lot of myth, a lot of stories that are ancient regarding this sacred plant. Sacred plants, I should say, the ayahuasca vine and the chacruna leaf. But this is what was used for healing for thousands of years. So this has stood the test of time for thousands of years, right? Compared to modern medicine with big pharma, it's not even like 50 years old. And it's causing all this havoc in health and causing more problems than it is fixing problems. So ayahuasca is found in the Amazon jungle. So there's different tribes, all along the Amazon River that have been using this for thousands of years. However, I believe it was like maybe 50 years, up until 50 years ago, I could be wrong about the exact number, but roughly up until about 50 years ago, this sacred brew called ayahuasca, made out of a vine and a leaf, was only instructed to be used by the shamans of the tribe, which were the medicine healers, the medicine men and women, the elders. And what it does in healing, it detoxes the body, detoxes the organs, cleanses the gut, it cleans the blood, which already kind of opens up a whole new possibility for us to function in a much healthier way. It also allows us to experience this molecule called DMT. So some of you may have heard of DMT, but DMT is this chemical that covers our brain, or is found to have covered our brain when we are born and when we die. Also, it's also found to be produced in the brain when we are in deep sleep. So it has something to do with us accessing or being in relationship with this other realm, the dream realm, the afterlife, or before life. It has something to do with that realm. So this chemical, normally, almost all living mammals and beings produce this chemical. This is just something nature has inherent in almost all living things. We actually can't experience its effects of it because there's a enzyme in us that breaks it down, so we don't really experience it. But with ayahuasca, it prevents the enzyme from breaking it down, if I'm saying this correctly. I could be wrong about how I'm describing it, but this is the general idea. It allows us to experience the DMT and what that realm that it's associated with, this afterlife. So it's kind of related to like this death or this dream state. And ayahuasca, it allows people to experience or remember things that they have blocked out. So traumatic memories, it allows us to remember them and process them in a way where we're not, we can get re-traumatized by experiencing this. So let me say, this is not for everybody. I'm not saying that ayahuasca is for everybody. I'm not saying you should do ayahuasca. I'm not saying that. I'm just telling you what I've learned from ayahuasca, but I want to just say what ayahuasca is because I think a lot of you folks don't know what it is. You can look this up right? So ayahuasca, Ayahuasca, ayahuasca. So this sacred medicine, it allows us to detox our body. It allows us to detox our organs. It allows us to process trauma that we blocked out, that we often suppress. It allows us to release emotions that we suppressed or repressed. It allows us to release a lot of stuck energy and even just like toxins. It purges the body of toxins. So it's a very holistic healing plant. However, in this state, we can be very vulnerable. I mean, basically, we really enter this state of our true nature, which is vulnerable. We are vulnerable beings. We are vulnerable at nature, and that's the truth that we all try to run away from, especially with addiction. Addiction, we're trying to numb ourselves from the truth of how vulnerable we are, how vulnerable we were when we were hurt, and we are running away from that vulnerable feeling. And that vulnerable feeling is the feelings as a child or when we were traumatized, where we experienced terror, fear, shame, guilt, all of the scary feelings. When we enter ayahuasca, we enter this state of being vulnerable. But like Brené Brown says, with vulnerability, there is courage. They don't exist separately. Vulnerability, when you embrace it, is courage. So to be courageous, we have to be vulnerable. Ayahuasca puts us in this very vulnerable state. So there's a lot of controversy and there's a lot of people with bad intentions creating retreats, pretending they're shamans, taking advantage of people, taking advantage of hurt people. And you see this across the board. You see this even with other religious groups, fanatical groups who take advantage of people who are very vulnerable in a very broken place and siphon power over people. But that's a whole nother topic. My main thing is that I wanted to say ayahuasca cleans us to some extent. It purges our body. It helps us reconcile memories that we blocked away. So it's a very healing aspect, which is why it's so important. And in the past, only shamans were allowed to work with this medicine. It cleans your perceptual field to some extent. Not the whole thing, but I will say it does start cleaning your perception of what's real. Some people, depending on what stage they're at and how much trauma they've developed, how much repressed emotions they have, how much hurt that they've not processed, it can be worse before it gets better. So in some cases, it may seem like some people are getting worse, where it's not cleaning their perceptual field, where it seems to just cloud their mind, where it seems to make them think a little bit more psychotic in some ways. So this is why it's very, very important that you understand me when I say ayahuasca is not for everyone. Ayahuasca is not for everyone. So with that little introduction of ayahuasca, I wanted to talk about 3 things that I had learned that it's taught me. And this was mainly through the purging and having to fast to prepare for the ayahuasca retreats. I learned a lot just regarding this aspect from fasting and the purging in ayahuasca. The power of detaching from these attachments, the illusions, detaching from the addictions, at least temporarily, and the strength that started to develop within me, and the freedom and liberation that I started to feel. I started learning the importance of detoxing, and I stumbled upon kind of a detoxing diet as well, the GAPS diet, which I've been kind of in and out of, which has been very beneficial for me, healing my gut and detoxing in a very safe way. Just trying to rebalance my gut flora. And then, yeah, that's also tied to the diet. I started to develop a very individual diet specific for me that has been healing. Food can be our greatest medicine, or it can be our greatest poison. And in fact, if it is our greatest poison, we're actually not consuming real food, it's processed poison. Or we also still have not developed that ability to gauge what is too much or what is too little. What is too much, what is too little, and what is actual poison? I think that is probably the 3 biggest things I learned from ayahuasca in regards to fasting and purging. I was working with ayahuasca for about 5 years. 5 years. And when I first started working with ayahuasca, it was more of like a bucket list thing that I wanted to do. It was like, I heard about it. I think I heard Terence McKenna talking about it on one of his lectures. Terence McKenna, you know, the psychonaut, really explored all kinds of psychedelics and ancient medicines. He was talking about ayahuasca and describing his experience, and I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, I really feel like I need to experience that. And I can go into the whole story in a whole nother video about how it all came to be, how I ended up finding ayahuasca. But it was that intention at first that drew me to it. And when everything kind of came together and synchronicities happened, and I finally found myself about to do my first ayahuasca retreat, I had to prepare. I didn't realize you had to prepare. But there's a diet that you have to follow. There's a diet of cutting things out, a lot of things that I was not used to cutting out, including stimulants. You had to cut out all these stimulants. You had to cut out sex, anything remotely related to sex. So that would mean porn, masturbation, all of these things. And, you know, when I started to clean out, I realized, like, preparing for this, I learned about the fast. So during the time, I was still smoking a lot of weed. And, you know, up until then, I never thought I would ever quit smoking weed. It was never even a thought. I thought for the rest of my life, I'm just gonna smoke weed. And even the same with porn, I thought for the rest of my life, I'm just gonna watch porn. Like, I thought it was like a part of my identity. I thought it was a part of who I was. These are things that I just accepted at the time as, like, this is me. So cutting out all of these things, like, you have to cut out all the stimulants at least 3 weeks before. And then you even have to start cutting out certain foods like onions, radishes. You have to start cutting out citrus. All of this is required to be cut out from your diet because it's supposed to allow the medicine to work better. And I wanted to have a great experience. So I wanted the medicine to work. So that's why I actually followed through with it. I was like, okay, I'm gonna cut it out. You have to stop drinking coffee. And I wasn't really drinking coffee, I think, by that time already. I think coffee had already started cutting out. But I had cut out all these things. You have to cut out fermented foods. You have to cut out red meat, pork, all the way up until like a week before. You even have to cut out all spices and salt. And I remember the first time I had cut out salt. Like, the first day was okay, and I started feeling like really fatigued. And the second day, oh my goodness, I was just like so emotional. I was like, what in the world? Like cutting out salt? Why am I so emotional? Like, I was just like really, really emotional, really sensitive. And I remember like the third day, everything was like so intense. Like being around certain people was really intense. I just noticed just fasting from these things made everything so intense, and I wasn't used to it. So one of the things I learned with the purging, which is, you know, your body getting rid of all kinds of things. I threw up so much to the point where like I was begging the medicine, okay, please stop, take it easy on me, please. Throwing up so much. And I could feel like me throwing up, and it was coming from different parts of my body. It was strange. My body was aching that first night, like just so achy, so painful. And I developed a fever, cold chills, like the whole thing. The whole experience that first night was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. I remember even just getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. Like the mosquitoes were nonstop. So in the midst of having these crazy visions, I was being shown like my addictions. Literally the first experience I've had with ayahuasca, it showed me some of the main addictions I was conscious of at that time, or semi-conscious of. Like I knew I needed to quit these things, but at the same time, I just accepted it as like a part of who I was. It showed me the addictions, and it showed me like the fast forwarded destiny and destination of each of those paths. Like it showed me all of these different paths and how it would impact my family. It showed me all of these things. Even like when I was purging and I was throwing up, it was flashing back to when I used to do a lot of cocaine, and it was kind of like it tells you in some weird way, without speaking with actual verbal words. It's more like a telepathic communication happening within you. And it was reminding me of these different experiences as I'm throwing up, and reminding me of this poison that I ingested. And then I was throwing up some more from a different area, and then it started reminding me of like my ecstasy addiction that I once had. Like I was so addicted to ecstasy for a few years of my life that was really hard for me to let go. And it was showing me how much all of these toxins were impacting my body, how much of it was overloading the stressors on my body. It was just in my body. We don't realize that the toxins we put in us, like they don't just leave. You can do a detox, and yeah, that will help. But for some reason, ayahuasca has a very unique way. It's very intelligent. Like it knows exactly where to go and remove these things. So for 5 years, you know, of doing retreats with ayahuasca, it was a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. But I will say, which is why I don't think it's for everyone, is that I've known a couple people in the retreats where the detox was not the best way, because it'll just detox the way the plant medicine works, make you throw up, you know, pull toxins out of you and you throw up. But when it comes to heavy metals, toxic metals, I know someone who experienced a very bad Herxheimer effect. Actually, I know 2 people who experienced really bad Herxheimer effect. The Herxheimer effect is when toxic metals are pulled out of your body for detox, but toxic metals need a chelator, something to hold onto it and bind to it, like activated charcoal or a bentonite clay or something of that nature, when it's pulled out of the tissue to bind to it, and then we can excrete it safely. But with ayahuasca, it's not like a chelator. It'll purge it, and then those toxins recirculate throughout your body or through your brain, and it's like being repoisoned all over again. And you have the same effects of getting toxic metal poisoning. And This one woman I know, I hope she's doing okay these days, but she said she was like so lost and so discombobulated after the retreat, like absolutely disoriented, where she got into a car accident and just like, oh. So this is like real shit. Another woman I know had like a full-on, like kind of like a schizophrenic breakdown. So this is like real. So what I learned is that ayahuasca, it can be good for detoxing certain things, but other things like toxic metals, and you won't know. I mean, you obviously won't know what kind of toxic metals are in your tissues. You know, we pretty much all have some kind of toxicity of toxic metals just because of the environmental factors that we are living in, the environmental factors that were in the food, our parents, and you know, just passing through our mother's birth canal, being born through those genes. Those toxins are also passed down to us. So what I learned about ayahuasca is the importance of detoxing, and also learning that it may not always be the safest way to detox. And I guess for the luck of the draw, I was okay. Although I've had other experiences with other detoxing medicines that were just absolutely horrific, like combo. That's a whole nother story. So fast forward, the more retreats I did, I started getting used to letting go of the weed. I started getting used to intentionally practicing cutting out porn, fasting from porn. I got used to practicing abstinence. I got used to letting go of these attachments. And these are the attachments that we developed as children because it felt like safe love. It felt like a warm blanket that made us feel safe and secure, and it didn't hurt us. It produced a lot of feel-good chemicals, which are not exactly like the same chemicals deep healthy love produces, oxytocin, but it's similar. It's feel-good chemicals, and this becomes our surrogate. It becomes like our babysitter. And I got used to letting go of their hand. Like every time I did ayahuasca, I got used to letting go of their hand. Another thing I realized is that just from my own experience with detoxing from weed, you know, I used to have to take drug tests. Once upon a time, I was a lifeguard and swim coach, and I had to take these periodic drug tests. And we knew when we would have to take it, so I would prepare. And I used to do this detox tea. But I noticed, this is when I was smoking a lot of weed, when I would do the detox tea, my cravings after I did the detox and I would pass the actual test, like I would pass the drug test, my cravings for the weed, they kind of were gone. They would eventually come back, maybe like a month later, and then I'd end up smoking again. But I noticed that detox had this effect on cravings. And so the more I did ayahuasca, the more I worked with ayahuasca, not only was I intentionally like fasting a period of time, letting go like this. And you know, with addictive personality, I went balls in with ayahuasca. I was doing like 4 retreats a year, and it all ended up blowing up in my face. I ended up having some really terrifying experiences in ayahuasca. And basically, you know, that's what the addiction archetype does, the addiction tendency does. We don't have that gauge when we are stuck in this addictive behavior. We don't have the gauge of what is too much or what is too little, or what is like not good at all, like what is just poison, period. But you know, it becomes such a surrogate for us, a warm, safe blanket of love that we feel with it, that it's so hard to let go. But the more I did these fasts in ayahuasca, and this was actually my first experience to fasting. Like, I've never really done any kind of fast, no water fast, not even intermittent fasting when I started doing ayahuasca. I only started intermittent fasting maybe about 3 years ago, midway through my journey with ayahuasca. But fasting, you know, I realized that you give your body a break of what was too much. And you really start to see that you can live and survive without these things that you thought you needed to survive. And you know, it's something about that when you experience that, like, I'm safe, I'm fine. Not only that, I feel healthier, I feel more clear-minded, I have more clarity, I feel more focused without these substances, these idols, these attachments, these addictions. Like, I started to fall in love with that. Like, it feels like so much more empowering. Like, I don't need that. And I feel like free to some extent. And you know, I think there's something about our physiology. In fact, I know this to be a fact. There's something about our physiology. It needs to get used to being able to produce those feel-good chemicals on its own again. Our bodies, our physiology becomes so accustomed and dependent on these external substances, whatever it may be, for us to produce these feel-good chemicals. And that is why the addiction, like, just prolongs and lives such a long life for most people and never dies for some people. They don't take that time to detox from it, to fast from it, to let their body acclimate and let their body relearn. Like, our bodies are so intelligent. If you give it what it needs and you reduce the toxic load, you start removing the harmful things, the body figures out and remembers how to produce what it needs to survive and thrive. And as I started doing this more, my body will get used to feeling great without it. And you know, I noticed that addictions, they are basically what in Christianity they call idols. They are what in Buddhism they call illusions and attachments. Addictions are just that. But people don't understand that the addiction is not the problem. It's a symptom of a deeper problem, which is the unprocessed pain, not understanding ourselves, not understanding our body, not understanding that our body can heal and produce those feel-good chemicals if you give the body the right conditions, the nurturing, the love, the care, connecting it back to nature. Then you understand and learn that we have everything we need. Like, we are able to heal. And it's the trauma, or I should say, trauma is the internal perception, internal story we've developed from a very painful experience. So ayahuasca had brought me through this introduction of fasting that I never realized. Like, I didn't realize how hard it was to cut out salt. But also, as I grew more and more into this new version of myself, where I also became certified as a holistic health coach with the Czech Institute under Paul Chek's amazing school, I learned that salt is actually really important. It's just some people take it to an extreme, and some people are not actually ingesting real salt. Processed salt, which is in a lot of commercial products, is actually poison. You know, I think they just call it, what is it? It's just a certain chemical in salt, but it strips salt from all its trace minerals. But salt real salt, preferably Celtic salt with the least amount of toxic metals in it. A lot of salts actually have a lot of toxic metals. You can dive into the research if you like. But real salt is really good for us. Like the minerals it provides, it helps us with hydration. But what I learned from ayahuasca and detoxing from salt is that salt helps us retain water. And this may blow your mind, but you can actually look into the science of water with Veda Austin, or God, what is her name? Jen Isabel? I think her name is Jen Isabel, who's a water advocate. But anyway, Veda Austin is a water scientist, and she's proven over and over, and still proving to this day, that water holds memory. Water is a living being. Because water holds memory and the salt helps us retain the water, I've learned through this connecting of the dots and my own experience through this, that when I fast from salt and all that emotions that came up was my body getting rid of old retained water. It's getting rid of the emotions. And of course, I have no proof for this other than Veda Austin's science that water does in fact hold memory, and that salt does in fact help our body retain water. That's the only proof I have. But I do have that experience of letting go of all these emotions that would come up out of nowhere. I don't think it's beneficial for people to just live with no salt. Again, this goes back to the Taoist philosophy, not too much, not too little. I think there's extremes, and what I also learned is that there's people on this path, the ayahuasca path, where they go into a deeper journey of becoming an ayahuasca shaman. And from my perspective, I've noticed that most ayahuasca shamans really cut out the salt. And they have their own reasons for all of that. I do notice though, for the person that I choose to be, especially as a holistic health coach, especially learning from Paul Chek, world-renowned rehabilitation coach, rehabilitates top world athletes, who is also very shamanic and has done lots of ayahuasca. I'd rather take Paul Chek's advice, just because I'd rather embody the same path that he lives. Like, he's like, what, in his 60s, absolutely top shape, like top shape, and just is a living, breathing example of health, wealth, love, and joy. And so that's why, like, I've come to this place where I realize that cutting out salt does help me to some extent, but also I realized that my body was going through certain pains, and maybe that's part of the cleansing process. When I started cutting out too much salt, like later in the years of doing ayahuasca, and I realized that a little bit of salt even helped me through my later ayahuasca journeys. Like, whereas everyone else was cutting out salt completely, in the beginning that's what I was doing. But towards my later journeys, I would put just a little bit of salt in my water, and just a very tiny, just so I can be hydrated, because I had some terrible experiences post ayahuasca ceremony of just terrible migraines and headaches and dehydration. So I found that to not be beneficial for me. And I know some people think that everyone in the ayahuasca community, that's law, is cutting out salt. But for me, what I realized helped me perform at my best. And not only that, like, it didn't affect my journeys at all. It didn't affect the lessons I learned through ayahuasca. It didn't affect my visuals. It didn't affect me in any negative way when I started including just a little bit of salt. So that's one thing I learned from detoxing from salt. Detox has been a game changer in the clarity I've had. The clarity with that inner voice, the clarity with my intuition. Detox has played a huge role in that. And so the last thing that I've learned regarding this aspect of fasting with ayahuasca is diet. It really taught me the importance of my diet, especially when it started showing me like the things I have ingested, like drugs in the past, substances in the past, and showing me like the effect it had on burdening my physiology, which also impacted the way I perceive the world, my clarity, my intuition, my connection to myself. Like everything is connected. You know, the mind, the body, the soul, it's all tied together as one, and we can't affect one without affecting the other. We're actually all completely tied to the whole web of life. Like what we do to ourselves, I realize we're doing to the environment. What we do to the environment, we're doing to ourselves. What I do to my body, I'm doing to my health, and what I'm doing to my health, I'm doing to my relationships, and what I'm doing to my relationships, I'm doing to the environment. So like we can't tug on one area of the web of life without affecting the whole web of life. And this is what it means to think holistically. To see holistically is to see how everything is connected together, how I'm connected to you, how you are connected to me, how my words are impacting you, and my experience is may be impacting you. So I learned that diet is super important. And also because I started, noticing that no salt wasn't working so well for me, but it was working completely fine for these other people. I learned that my diet is very unique and individual. And going on to the work of Paul Chek, even more so, I started learning about metabolic typing. And then in my own later journey, more recently, I learned about how metabolically inflexible I was. I became really conscious of the food intolerances that I have, and how that diet of cutting out the red meat with ayahuasca wasn't working for me, considering that I have anemia that I was born with. Not to say that it can't be cured, but red meat plays a very critical role in my body being able to function during this time, in this state of my development. Maybe one day it'll heal and I won't need as much red meat, or I won't be deficient in my body being able to absorb iron. But as of now, all of these little things, including like the things I've had to cut out with ayahuasca and its effect on my mind, body, and soul, I've learned that diet is really critical. Diet is so important to my creativity, my vitality, my ability to sleep, my ability to be sharp, to focus, my ability to be metabolically flexible, which is critical for health and longevity. Metabolically flexible, and understanding my metabolic type, what my genes are more in tune to thrive off of, what kinds of foods my genes and my ancestors and my lineage have been thriving off of since ancient times. So diet is something I really started to learn through ayahuasca. I had experimented with like being vegan and vegetarian about 10 years ago, when I went through this whole dark night of the soul of going through a supermoto accident, having my appendix cut out in surgery, and then being poisoned by pharmaceuticals, and then recovering from that for like 10 years. that also taught me that I needed to try and see if diet was affecting inflammation in my body. I had developed fibromyalgia at the time. So that first initially is what started waking me up to diet. But when I went through ayahuasca, it started showing me even more specifics, more details. And then going through the work with Paul Chek, the details became so clear that now it's like me exploring a very finely tuned diet that works just for me. Like the diet that works for me is not the diet that's gonna work for you, maybe, you know? But what I learned is that there are toxic poisons that are just poison for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you have a different diet, there are poisons that are just poison even in little amounts. So maybe I can share those real quick with you here. So they are processed salts, like I was saying, where it's stripped from all the trace minerals. Processed seed oils, which are not ancient and they're very new as far as used for cooking and pushed heavily through advertising and big corporations, like the canola oils, the soybean oil, all these seed oils. I would say that of all the seed oils, sesame seed oil is probably the least harmful that I'm aware of so far. I could learn something else in the future, but sesame oil has, from what I've seen from the literature, the scientific literature, is that it's not so bad as long as it's used more raw than it is cooked. But you know, the ancient oils, it goes back to like coconut oil, olive oil, ghee, lard, duck fat, tallow. These are all ancient cooking oils that have stood the test of time. Whereas all this other shit, these toxic seed oils, processed seed oils, which were once used for industrial lubrication of industrial equipment, are actually in fact causing dysfunction to the cells, our cellular structure. It's causing dysfunction within our cells, and this is proven in scientific literature. You can go and look this up for yourself. You don't have to believe a word I say. I suggest you go and look and see if this is true for yourself. So I said what? Toxic salts, toxic oil, processed sugar, fake sugar, which has been extracted from whatever fruits and then also manufactured in a lab, like scientific lab, which is just not even food anymore. That is causing such a disruption to everyone's biochemistry. It's causing such an epidemic in obesity and cancer. But you know, if you like really just combine all these things, you realize that a lot of the toxic treats on the market today, which are fake foods, packaged candies and packaged treats, are made up of all this shit, all of these poisons, and it's the most addictive. You see, this is what people really can't stop eating. This is like, it's crazy. Another really toxic poison that is pretty common is something like the fake cheese, processed foods. A lot of this pasteurized milk, even the milk is stripped from all the enzymes. Raw milk is illegal nowadays, which is just only because that they want to be able to keep milk on the shelf to be sold, you know, and they want it to be shelf stable, but it lacks the nutrients, it lacks the enzymes. Raw milk contains all these beneficial enzymes. Even with the real cheese is actually good for most people, but most of us have developed such abnormal gut flora from consuming all these things to now we actually have an intolerance to dairy. We actually have an intolerance to these flours and these glutens. Oh yeah, so the processed sugar, that includes like a lot of these processed flours, wheat flour. A lot of these are filled with other fillers and additives that we don't know of. And not to mention that it's even made out of these genetically modified crops, monocropped. The karma to that, so in ayahuasca, what you also start to really understand is the karma attached to eating these foods, the karma attached to consuming toxic poison. There's a karma, there's a sowing of seeds that you are doing, and there is a reaping that will happen, a reaping that will occur. So when you are sowing toxic poison into your body, you are going to reap something relevant and correlated to what you are sowing.